Welcome everybody. This session is Wacky Wonderful Walls, using posters to elevate instruction. I'm Melissa Ferguson. I'm a curriculum manager at Bow States Digital, and we're going to be talking today about how you can use the physical space around you in your classroom to maximize your instruction. So looking at this for today, we're going to first of all talk about how to select posters for your classroom, which things should actually make the cut for what you use in your classroom, which things maybe not so much, where you should place these things after you've already picked them out to use in your classroom, how you can use these posters to establish routines to carry you through the school year, and some strategies for how to teach with the posters that you choose for your classroom. So first of all, we're talking about how to select the posters for your classroom. Which things should actually make it onto your walls? You've got limited space, so which things are the best to help you meet your teaching goals? So first of all, you need to identify your must-haves. And a little bit of a side note here, this is going to be different for every teacher. You have your unique style, your unique goals, the way that you like to do things. Me personally, I was a CI teacher, so we're going to be approaching this from a bit of a CI perspective as to how that would work, just because of that's what would work for me in my classroom. But the ideas are the same, just the particular posters might be a little bit different. So same advice, just a little bit, you might want a different poster where I suggest one if you're not teaching with CI. All right, so first you want to identify your must-haves. So think about the words and phrases that you use the most frequently in your classroom. Those are the things that you're going to want to make sure that you've got somewhere as easy access in your room. You also want to think about some of the more complex concepts that you're going to teach that might need some visual support. So your students would understand it a lot better if you had some sort of visual to help them understand how this concept works. Other messages that you want to convey, so things in the target language, motivational kind of things, just ideas that you want to put out there for your students to understand, or some themes that you plan to study. So if you're working on thematic units, what kind of images, posters go along with the themes that you're studying. And then you identify your nice to have. So whatever room that you have in your classroom, you're going to put your must haves first. Whatever room that you have left in your classroom, start thinking about your nice to haves. So the things that are improved with visual support, but you could teach it without it, but the visual support makes it better. Things that go along with your classroom aesthetic. Maybe you're one of those Pinterest ready teachers where your classroom is absolutely gorgeous. So you have things that go along with like the color of your classroom, locations of places that you're teaching, about messaging that you want to have in your classroom, like super inspirational stuff in your classroom. You also want to have some things that are for entertainment, for motivation, or just for humor to lighten up some things in your classroom a little bit. And you want to have some things that are specific to a unit that you're teaching or a celebration that's going on in the target culture that you want to integrate into your classroom. So what should you look for in a poster? Because not everything can make the cut. So what things do you want to have on a poster for it to work in your classroom? These are some things to keep in mind. Not every poster is going to check off every one of these boxes. These are just some things to think, okay, is it useful in this in some way? So the first one, is it useful? Can it help your students to reach their language goals or your personal goals, your SEL goals that you have in your classroom? Is it aligned to the content? So does it actually match what you're teaching in your classroom at that moment, at any given moment? Is it legible? So you might have a really full classroom where students in the back can't read things because the text is too small or something like that. So can your students read it? Is it organized? You want to make sure that whatever it is that you're putting up on your walls is presented in a way that isn't going to be confusing or frustrating for your students as they're trying to make sense of it. It should also be eye-catching, so look for things with nice and colorful, that with images that grab your students' attention. And of course, you want to have some motivational things in your classroom as well, because it's not all just down to the business of the language. You want to also nurture the whole student as you're in your classroom. So once you've figured out the things that are going to make the cut, you need to figure out where you're going to put them, because your classroom is arranged a certain way and the real estate on your walls can be pretty precious. So what are you going to put and where are you going to put it? So you need to use your location wisely. First of all, think about your spot in the classroom. Where do you stand the most? And it might just be that you have a habitual spot where you like to stand, but I do know that some teachers have like their spot And when they go stand in that spot, they use it strategically, and their students know, oh, my teacher is standing there. I know I need to listen to this. So think about what your teaching spot is, how you use it, and which posters might need to be near there. Also think about which areas are easily accessible. I know there was one year I had a completely overloaded classroom, and I had to push desks up against walls, which I don't like to do. So that entire wall was pretty much off limits because we could not get to it. I couldn't point to it. Students couldn't go up to it and look at it. So you need to keep that in mind. Are there areas in your classroom that really can't be accessed by your students? And can it be seen by all students? So again, that's going back to like the fonts. Are your fonts large enough that your students will be able to read it no matter where they are in the classroom? So your places of prominence, like I mentioned before, this is going to vary by your teaching style, what you put in these places of prominence. Think about your style. These are just my suggestions from what worked in my classroom, but yours could be different. Think about the things that you say or refer to the most, and you're going to want to have those close to you so that you can really drive those things home to your students as you say them. These could also be occupied by the same posters all year. So maybe there's something that you want to have in that your proximal spot that you're going to use the entire class year, the school year. Or if your students have already acquired a certain amount of language and you know that you don't really need that poster there anymore, maybe you have a rotation. So I'm going to take this down and put something new up because my students have already mastered this. So one of my most important prominent posters is my question words. So you're going to be asking tons and tons of questions in your world language classes. And for me, the question words posters went really well with story scripts. So if you're a CI teacher, you're working through a story script and you need to add a detail into your story, you're going to ask your students like, what's the person's name, or where are they, or any other kind of things. And when you get to those questions, you want to very deliberately point to that interrogative word as you're asking the question. That is going to make it so much easier for your students to understand what you're asking them and make your story go a lot more quickly and more easily. It also works really well with PQA because again, you're asking tons of questions. You want your students to be able to follow along. So as you're asking your questions, and I have some examples here in Spanish, when you're asking a question that starts with quien, who, you want to go up to that poster and you want to point to the word quien, and they're going to see that picture and they're going to understand that you're asking who, and that's going to make them a lot more comfortable to be able to answer your question because they understand it more fully. Another prominent poster in my CI classroom was the Super 7 verbs. And these are like the foundation. I mean, you can build so much on top of these 7 words. And as a matter of fact, in Voces, we have some pre-units in 3 of our titles. We have our Nuestra Historia Puentes, so that's the middle school curriculum. Nuestra Historia Uno, which is your level 1 Spanish curriculum, and then Notre Histoire, level 1. And these level 1 or these beginning courses have an entire unit that's based just on these Super 7 words. So you're using them as vocab words. You're using them in PQA. You're using them in class discussions. You're using them in a story. And as you're working through this Super 7 unit, you can go to that poster and you can point to it every single time, and your students are going to understand what you're saying, and it's really going to cement that into their minds. And after working through that unit, they're going to go through the rest of that curriculum so easily because they have such a solid foundation of working with those Super 7 verbs. Another thing that's really huge in my classroom is the linking words. And for me, I liked to have my linking words exact like right where I was doing my write and discuss. So right next to my board, I had my linking words. And so what I would do is I mostly taught Spanish 1 and 2, and mostly Spanish 1, like my schedule was full of Spanish 1 classes and a few Spanish 2 sprinkled in, but lots of Spanish 1. So very low, they're novice. So as we're writing, doing a write and discuss after a day of activities, I'd start writing on the board and the students are dictating to me what to write. So they'd have these very simple sentences and yeah, that's awesome. I love this sentence. So we're writing it down on the write and discuss. And then we'd get to the end of the sentence and I wouldn't put a period at the end of my sentence. I'd very deliberately not put it there. And then I'd walk over to that poster and I'd pick one of my linking words. And, but, because, things like that. And I'd write that into the write and discuss. And when I did that, it was a signal to my students like, oh, we're going to combine some sentences. We're not done talking about this yet. And so when I get that linking verb written in there, then they'd start thinking about, okay, what little sentence can I add to this that explains and, but, because. And so that was a great way to really push my students' writing up a proficiency level without having to teach, okay, this is how we say because, or okay, and just very good way to subtly put that in there. And they just internalized it from writing it so many times as part of our write and discuss. Another prominent poster in my classroom is the how to say who, which is a different way of looking at conjugation that's very specific to CI. And I would use these as we're working through readings, if we're doing TPR, doing discussions, because it shows how you take your target structure, which usually is written in a third person singular, like habla or corre or whatever, and you put it in, you change the ending just ever so slightly as you start talking about someone else in a different context. So if it was habla, speaks, and I want to talk about myself, I've got that poster right there. I can say yo hablo and go to it, point to it, and they can see, oh, she put an O on it because she's talking about herself. Or if we're reading a story and it's got two people that are speaking and it says hablan and there's an N on it, I can point out the N in the word and then go over to that poster, show them the N on there and say they, and do like a really quick pop-up grammar of like 15 seconds. Why does this have an N on it? Oh, because they are doing it, not he or she. So this poster is something that I always want to have really close to me as I'm working through things, because as students are getting used to the different conjugations of verbs, I want to point those out every time we see them, and I want to do it quickly so that we can move on and not spend a whole lot of time on grammar. Another thing that I love to have in a prominent place in my classroom is rejoinders. I like to give my students a way to react to every single thing that happens in the classroom. So I would have these, they're actually up kind of high above me in my classroom, and something would happen in class where I knew I could react with one of those, and I'd very stop exactly what I was doing in the classroom. I'd find that rejoinder, I'd point to it, and I would say that rejoinder, and my students would know, oh, that's a really appropriate way to respond to the situation. And a little funny story with that is that one of the first ones that I would use a lot is lo siento, I'm sorry. Just like if they said they're having a bad day or something, I'd say lo siento. So then back when we had the COVID shutdowns, one of the things that our school wanted to do to build community is have a picture of the teachers with something that the kids knew they said all the time. So mine was lo siento, and we put that on social media so that kind of like to build some community as we were all stuck in our little corners of the world. And then after you have your prominent posters, you're going to move to the periphery, the outer parts of your classroom. And this is going to be where you put things that are maybe more complex, so you're not going to use them as frequently in the classroom, but they're still really important. So just because they're on the outsides of your classroom doesn't mean that they're any less important. They're just maybe not as frequent. So when you come to something that you've put on the periphery of your classroom, you're going to be even more intentional about using it. You're going to take time out of your instruction to pause, walk towards that poster, and that time that you're walking is going to signal to your students, something's happening here. I need to listen to this because my teacher just stopped talking entirely, is walking across the room. What is it that she wants me to know? So putting things in the periphery really can be impactful, and it gives your students extra time as you're walking to think about, okay, what did she just say? What is she pointing to give them more time to figure out what this is and why it's important. So for me, some things that I would put in the periphery of my classroom is direct object pronouns. They come up, but they don't come up all the time. So when they do come up, I really want to make a big deal of, okay, this is something new that we don't see all the time. So I would see the direct object if we were reading something and it had a direct object in it. And let's say it was like los. Okay, so blah, 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 los. So I would see that. I'd pause, point it out in the reading that's projected on my board, and then walk to that direct object pronoun, point it out. This is a direct object pronoun. Ask students really quickly in a pop-up grammar, why is this used here? And have them figure that out. And then I'd walk back and then we keep reading. But that deliberate pause gives your students time to think about what it is that they just read and then anticipate, okay, this is something that I need to know because my teacher is walking away and trying to direct my attention to something else. I would also use this in write and discuss. So if we were writing something and I knew my students were ready to start replacing a noun with a direct object, I'd be writing and they're copying it down. I'd leave a space in front of a verb, write the verb, and then I wouldn't, like, once they said what the actual direct object is as a noun, I wouldn't write it down. I'd have them say it, I'd acknowledge, yep, that's right, and then I would walk to the direct object pronoun poster, show them which one I'm going to use, explain that it's a direct object pronoun in a really quick pop-up grammar, come back and write that into the write and discuss, so that way they can see we just replaced what we said as a direct object, whatever that noun was, with this word that she pointed out in the poster. Another thing I'd put in the peripheral might be my Sweet 16 verbs, or they could also be one that you just replace with your Super 7. So you're building upon your Super 7 verbs. This is hugely the foundation in your classroom. They should be somewhere where you can get to them pretty easily. And then another one is colors. And colors I love to have in my classroom. It seems like such simple vocabulary, but they're so useful in adding details to your stories. So you come to a story, you need to ask, like, what color is their shirt or something like that. And you've got your colors right there. So you don't need to actually teach colors. They can just come up as they come up. And they're also really useful for taking brain breaks, which we'll talk about in just a minute. All right, so you can use your posters once they're up in your classroom to establish routines. And routines are awesome for your classroom. The more routines you have, the less time you have to think about actually planning things out. So routines, they build familiarity in your classroom. They make it easier for your students to take in new content within that context, and they keep your classroom running smoothly so you don't have to think about what am I going to do every minute of every day, because you have these routines that I know I'm going to start my class with this. I know I'm going to end my class with this. There's a big chunk of my planning already taken care of. So one thing is calendar talk or just small talk. So you want to have somewhere in your classroom where you're talking about what's going on in your students' lives every day. Start out by talking with the date. So I would always, every day, I had my spot for the date. So we'd talk about what day it is, what date it is. You can throw in some weather if you want to. If it's a student's birthday, you want to point that out so that you can be recognizing those students as well. And this can all be in the same area. You can sing to that student if you want to. And then after that, just kind of see where your conversation takes you. Can you seg into, is this a good day for whatever you guys have planned in your lives today? And go into more conversations. It's a great way to keep your classroom on this note of we start in the target language and we stay in the target language every single day because we have this routine set in place. Another great thing is passwords. So if you have some motivational type posters in your classroom, you can use those as a password. If you've never heard of that, I'll just briefly say it's where you meet your students at the door every day and they have something that they say to you as they're entering the classroom. And it gives you this really brief but really impactful one-on-one interaction with your students. They're saying the password, you're acknowledging them, and then they're getting into your classroom. So you could take any of your more motivational type posters or any kind of sayings that they have on them, use that as your password, and your students are going to see it when they're in the classroom, use it as they're coming in, and build some sort of connection with you on a daily basis. And then we can use posters for brain breaks. So this is so important to take a purposeful rest in your classroom, but you can also reinforce the target language at the same time if you're really purposeful with it. So using numbers, you can do a brain break that's called count to 11. And it's really briefly, you just start by saying 1 in the target language and somebody else has to say 2, 3, whatever, up until you get to 11. But the kicker is that nobody can talk at the same time. So anytime you have 2 people talk at once, you got to start over and just keep doing that until you can get to it or until you think enough time has passed and the students have had a good enough break. Another one is odd versus even, kind of like rock, paper, scissors, where students are showing a number on their hand and one person wins if it's odd, one person wins if it's even. And so you're practicing numbers, but you're also taking a very quick break from doing whatever your bigger task is. And I will say, since I went over to a whole bunch of times during this summer presentation, so find them in there under brain breaks because they are amazing. And back to our colors, you can use the colors poster for, oh, I'm going to turn my video off because I think my internet's starting to get a little weak on me. So hopefully that solves the problem. All right, so colors for your brain breaks. You can just get the students up really quickly and say, hey, class, go touch the color red. Go touch something that's yellow. Go touch something that's pink. And it's a very fast brain break. You don't have to teach the colors. You can just point to them and have the words there, and your students, they're going to pick them up without you even having to specifically teach them. Another brain break with this numbers poster that I have pictured here is to have your students guess a number between 1 and 100 in the target language. Just really quick, interrupt your teaching and say, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 100. Have them start guessing, tell them to guess higher or lower, and go until someone has guessed the number. And then I have some pictures of cultural places. You could do a four corners, and again, four corners is something that I know has come up so much this week already, but just put them in the corners and then say a place instead of anything else that's in the corner, and have those students be out and play until you have one person left. So really fun way to just take a quick brain break, and your students are also seeing what target cultures look like. And you should also have some sort of a routine in your classroom for absent work. Now, if you're teaching with Voces exclusively, you've already got the calendar view where your students can go in and they can see everything that they've missed. So I've got a picture of that there so you can see what that looks like, but your students can find that anytime they log in just by accessing it. But if you're using Voces as a supplement or just like one part of your entire teacher toolkit, then you're going to want somewhere where your students can find the work that they've missed. And so have a place in your classroom where students know this is where they can come. This is where they can see what they've done, pick up any copies of anything that they've done. This is your absent work spot, and it should be designated as such so that all of your students know that they just access it without having to take time away from class to say, what did we do yesterday? All right, and some strategies for teaching with posters. First of all, use your posters not just to teach, but to create an atmosphere of exploration. So when your students come into your language class, it's not just learning a language, they're having an experience. So show them that your classroom is this zone where language and culture come together every single day. Represent celebrations from the target culture, places from target countries, people, famous people from the target culture. Have those in your classroom so that your classroom feels different. It feels like a different kind of space. And also, you should give your students some time in the limelight. So when your students have completed some work, give them a place in your classroom where you can showcase that. They're going to feel seen, they're going to feel celebrated if you show their work in the classroom. So like in Voces, we have storyboards that you can use and have your students create, illustrate, and caption some storyboards. Or you could use things like, this is from Teachers Discovery, but it's called PicTalk, and you can have students either write about themselves or pick a character from a story and create a PicTalk about whatever themselves, that character, whatever, and show those in the classroom. Let your students see that their work is valued, and let other students interact with them so that students can learn about each other and learn from each other as well. You should also try to make your posters decorative and at the same time. So they're not just making your classroom pretty, but you're using them in your instruction as instructional tools. So you can use them to play games like this verb chart that we have here. You could divide your class into some teams and give each team its own chart that's hanging on the wall, and have them race to conjugate verbs and see how quickly they can do that conjugation. You can also use posters for guided notes. So I picked out 3 posters that you could use with Voix du Monde chapter 3, where you're doing descriptions of people. So you could use the emojis poster and this poster with QR codes, forgot what they were for a second, and have your students look at these and fill in a vocabulary list with what the translations of those words might be. After that, they move on to this conjugation of the verb être and fill in that conjugation. And then as an extra challenge, they can synthesize all of that into sentences, use the verb and some adjectives, and start writing their own sentences. I know I'm getting very short on time. I got 2 minutes left, so let's see. Use them to add novelty, variety, and intrigue. So look for things that match the unit that you're teaching. Like in Voix du Monde 1, chapter 9, it's about activities, and there's a story about snowboarding. So you can add some of these things in here to show that you're focusing on your specific unit at that time. And here's another example from Voces for El Mundo 1. I'm going to kind of skip over these a little bit quickly. And you can use your posters to encourage communication. Give students language that they can use to interact with each other throughout your classroom. Pick things that you know your students are going to need to say, have them in your classroom at eyesight so that your students can start using them and really boost their communication in the classroom. So kind of to wrap this all up, why do we love posters? They give us extra instruction support when we need them. They help us to establish our classroom routines that shave time off of our planning. It gives your students a spot in the limelight, helps you to make it seem like your class is an exploration, can get your students moving around, it adds some novelty, and it keeps your students communicating. And then I wanted to give you some access to this teacher inspiration guide. So if you're looking for more ideas as to what you can do with posters, find this. It's free. And you can take a look at that and you can get more ideas as to what you guys can do with posters. Not just posters from Teachers Discovery, but posters that you already have in your classroom, posters that you've created yourself even, just what can you do with these posters to make your instruction even better. And then there's also, when you access this later, there's a link here for more guides. So if you're like, I love these ideas, I want more ideas for everything, click on that. We've got things for like pencils, stickers, all kinds of things that you can find teachers' inspiration guides for. And I made it right on the dot, 2:30. Thank you so much for being here with me today. If you have questions, want to reach out, my email is melissaf@vocesdigital.com. One L and one S in Melissa, melissaf@vocesdigital.com, and I would love to hear from you.